I became very frustrated with all of the criticism I was receiving while I was president. Just because I think it's the right thing for citizens to do doesn't mean that when it was happening to me, I liked it. No one likes that, having millions of people criticize them. I got frustrated, but I made a point to make sure that there were newspapers, even the ones that criticized me, in the presidential mansion. We didn't call it the White House yet. It was more of a peach color at the time. And I made sure they were prominently placed in the presidential mansion so that people who were there would understand I wasn't just ignoring those people who criticized me. However, I was also surrounded by people who wouldn't criticize me. They wouldn't tell me I was wrong, even if I tried to put square wheels on a carriage. They'd say, "Oh, yes, Mr. President. Oh, yes, square wheels. Excellent. Well done, Mr. President." The tendency, the more power you have, is that the people around you try to figure out what you want them to say, and they say that. And that's a terrible trap. Here's something I did that I hope will be a useful example to you when I was president. At the time, things were different. The president's face wasn't commonly known all over the country. So I could go for horse rides or walks around the capital city. It wasn't like this at the time. Paved roads. It was muddy, swampy, forests everywhere, barely any kind of social life. And the president could say something and it wouldn't, or write something and it wouldn't become instantaneously spread throughout the country like the twittering of the birds in the trees. So I'd go for a horse ride on Eagle at the time. He was my favorite horse. He was a thoroughbred. And I could meet with people on my ride or on my walks and talk with them, and they wouldn't have any idea who I was. And I wouldn't tell them. I didn't dress in fine clothing when I was president. I was trying to make a point that the president is just another citizen who temporarily holds some power, but then is going to be a citizen against him. So I made sure I didn't dress in fine clothing that would separate me from most people. And I would strike up conversations with them and ask them, "What do you think of the president?" And listen as they criticized. Because this was an honest opinion. This wasn't someone trying to impress me to get on my good side. This is what people do when there's a king and their courtiers surrounding the king. They would just tell me what they thought. One time, I just to have a little fun, there's a man who was particularly, I didn't write down his name, so I'm afraid I can't remember it. If I didn't write something down, I can't remember it, sorry. You pass about 200 years of age and your memory begins, it just goes worse. But if I wrote it down, I can often look it up to refresh myself. So there's one time, because I was just going to have a little fun, he was really, really criticizing me. I mean, he was a Federalist, a die-hard Federalist. He hated everything that I did. And I was asking him questions, and after a while I thought, this man isn't actually irrational. He's passionate and maybe zealous about his hatred of me and about the Democratic Republican Party, but he wasn't a complete loss for reasonable thought. So I thought maybe I could convince him. So I started pushing back a little bit, saying, "Well, I think actually the president would be interested in hearing what you have to say." "Oh, no," he said. "The president doesn't want to hear that. He doesn't care about the average American citizen like myself." I said, "I think he does. I think he wants to hear your opinion." "Well, let's go up to the presidential mansion and see." See, in those days, you could just walk right up to the front door of the presidential mansion and knock on the door. As the country was a lot smaller, things moved a lot more slowly. So he took me up on my wager, if you will. I didn't let him know. Now I was enjoying myself. I know it was unkind, but I knocked on the door, too, just to keep the fun going. And the man didn't know who I was until the butler answered the door and said, "Oh, good day, Mr. President," and was a little confused why I knocked on the door. And the man blanched. His face turned pale. But I invited him in. There was no yellow fever or plague at the time, so this was safe. No smallpox. Invited him in, had him to dinner that night. Didn't have him for dinner. I wasn't angry at him. Had him to dinner that evening. Now, by the end of the evening in the conversation we had, he didn't agree with me still. But I hadn't convinced him to be someone who would vote for me. But we could have an intelligent conversation, and by the end of it, though we disagreed, he saw that though I was someone who held power, I was listening. Not just to the people who agreed with me, but to the people who disagreed with me as well. And I felt like that was a victory.